Welcome to Google Developers tutorial video. In this tutorial video, we will be connecting and visualizing all our data in Google Data Studio. Let us first see the overview of this tutorial that we will be learning are, 1. How a Google Data Studio Community Connector works. 2. How to use Google Apps Script to build a community connector. 3. How to use community connectors in Data Studio. For that we should be familiarized with basic JavaScript and Web APIs. Now let us learn on Community Connector Workflow. In a basic community connector, you'll define 4 functions that are, 1. GetAuth type function that tells Data Studio the authorization type for the connector. 2. GetConfig function that tells Data Studio how the user configuration screen should be rendered. 3. GetSchema function provides the schema for your data. 4. GetData function provides the actual data for the requested fields to the Data Studio. Depending on the current step of the workflow, Data Studio executes these connector functions and uses the response in the subsequent steps. Once the user has selected the connector, Data Studio now executes the connector script and calls the GetAuth type function. Based on the response provided by the connector, Data Studio will then trigger the required authorization flow. The user will see the auth flow on the screen and complete it to provide authorization to the connector. For now only the Google authorization is needed for the connector. For your implementation, you might need additional authorization from a third-party site. After the authorization is complete, Data Studio will call the getConfig function from the script. In this function, you can define what configuration information you would like to collect from the user. Based on the response from the script, Data Studio will render the configurations interface for the connector. It asks the user which type of data it should return. The user completed all the necessary configuration and clicks Connect. At this point Data Studio has the necessary configuration and calls the getSchema function to get the schema of the data. It will render the field screen and let the user update the schema if needed. The user clicks the Create Report button to move on to the next step. Now the user will be shown a blank Data Studio dashboard where they can add charts and tables to create their own report. When the user adds a new chart, Data Studio will make the getData function call to the connector script. Then Data Studio will render the chart with the data. This is basically how a community connector works. In the next step, you will start creating your connector in Google Apps Script. Now we will set up our Apps Script project. Step 1. Visit Google Apps Script. Step 2. Create a new Apps Script project by clicking plus New Script in the top left section. Step 3. Delete the My Function function. Step 4. Give the project a name by clicking on Untitled Project in the top left of the page and entering an appropriate name, and now you will start writing your connector code in the code.js file. Data Studio will call the getAuth type function when it needs to know the authentication method used by the connector. This function should return the authentication method required by the connector to authorize the third-party service. Users of your connector will need to configure the connector before they can start using it. With the getConfig function response, you can define what configuration options users will see. Data Studio calls the getConfig function to get the connector's configuration details. Based on the response provided by getConfig, Data Studio will render the connector configuration screen and change certain connector behavior. Data Studio calls the getSchema function to get the schema associated with the selected configuration for the connector. Based on the response provided by getSchema, Data Studio will show the field screen to the user listing all the fields in the connector. Update your manifest. In the Apps Script editor, select View, then Show Manifest File. This will create a new appscript.json manifest file. Replace your appscript.json file with this code. Save the Apps Script project. Then next, test your connector in Data Studio. Use the deployment Step 1. In the app's script development environment, click on Publish, then Deploy from Manifest to open the deployments screen. Step 2. Click on the deployment name or the Data Studio icon next to the Get ID link. It will reveal the direct connector link into Data Studio for this connector. Step 3. Click on the newly available connector link. It will open up a new window in Data Studio. Type in Google API in the text input area and click Connect in the top right. Third, confirm the schema. You will see the field screen. Click Create Report in top right. Finally, create your dashboard. You will be in the Data Studio dashboard environment. Final step is to add a time series chart. In the menu, click on Insert, then select a time series chart. Then drag a rectangle in the canvas. You should see a time series chart of the NPM download count for the selected package. Thank you for watching this video, but don't forget to subscribe to our channel.